Tonight, we journey back in time to the heart of ancient Rome. Close your eyes and picture the dusty streets beneath your sandals. The golden light of the setting sun spills across marble columns. Somewhere nearby, the roar of a crowd rises like a wave, echoing off the towering walls of the Colosseum. You are not just a visitor here, you are a gladiator, a warrior trained not only for survival but for spectacle, a man caught between the sword and the stage. This was the show business of the ancient world, a brutal, mesmerizing theater where pain became entertainment and blood wrote legends. Tonight, I will tell you how these men lived, how they trained, fought, laughed, feared, and sometimes broke free. We will walk through the training schools of the ludus, listen to the whispers of the crowd as the gates open, and feel the hot sand beneath our feet in the arena. And along the way, we will meet the most famous gladiator of them all, Spartacus, the slave who defied an empire. So settle in, let the past unfold around you, and may the echoes of Rome guide you gently into the night. Long before the crowds chanted in the Colosseum, long before emperors offered bread and blood to restless citizens, the origins of gladiator combat lay in something far more ancient and far more sacred. The first gladiators did not fight for cheers, they fought for the dead. Among the Etruscans, a mysterious civilization that thrived in Italy before Rome, funerals of noblemen were marked by ritual duels. Two warriors, sometimes slaves, sometimes willing men, would clash with weapons not for glory, but as a gift, a sacrifice of blood to honor the departed and accompany their soul to the afterlife. These were solemn affairs. Death was not always demanded, but it was welcomed. Rome, hungry for power and spectacle, absorbed this tradition and transformed it. What began as ritual became entertainment. By the time the Roman Republic was rising, gladiator fights were no longer rare. Wealthy citizens began sponsoring games, munera, during festivals or funerals, hoping to show off their status and gain political favor. And with each generation, the shows grew grander, bloodier, louder. Soon the games were no longer about mourning. They were about the crowd, the thrill, the control, and the gladiators. They became stars and slaves. Many were prisoners of war, fierce fighters from lands Rome had conquered, Gauls, Thracians, Germans. Others were criminals, sentenced to the arena instead of execution. And surprisingly, some were volunteers, poor men with no future, adventurers chasing fame, even former soldiers. They signed contracts, swore loyalty to a training school, and prepared to risk their lives for coin or legacy. Inside the ludus, the gladiator school, they were sorted, trained, and molded into living weapons. But not all gladiators were the same. There were distinct types, each with their own style, armor, and tactics. You could say they were the ancient version of character classes. The Murmillo, for example, wore a heavy helmet with a fish-shaped crest, carried a short sword and a large rectangular shield. He was the tank, relying on strength and defense. Then there was the Thraex, inspired by Thracian warriors. He carried a curved sword and a small shield, wearing greaves on both legs for agility. Quick, fierce, unpredictable. The Retiarius, the most unique of all, fought with a net and a trident, no helmet, no armor. He was fast, nimble, and dangerously clever. His job was to trap and strike, never get caught. Each gladiator type had a counterpart, creating choreographed balance like a living chessboard of blood and steel. To the Roman crowd, this was more than combat. It was theater, drama, a game of death wrapped in ritual and performance. But behind the cheers and the sand, these were real men, with real fears. Some fought for freedom, some for honor, some simply to survive another day. By the time the Roman Republic gave way to the empire, gladiator games were no longer just a ritual or a passing entertainment. They had become a cornerstone of Roman public life, a spectacle of blood, power, and control, a society's mirror reflecting both its grandeur and its darkness. Imagine the roar of 50,000 people echoing off the stone walls of the Colosseum, the heat shimmering above the sand, banners rippling in the breeze, and trumpets blaring through the morning sky. This was no longer a funeral rite or a small-town duel. This was the grand stage. And Rome was hungry for a show. It all began to change under Julius Caesar. He saw the games not just as amusement, but as a political weapon. He hosted extravagant combats to win the love of the people, bringing hundreds of gladiators into the city, each more fearsome than the last. His assassins may have ended his life, but his legacy of spectacle lived on. Under Emperor Augustus, the games became even more institutionalized. Calendar events planned like festivals. Colossal amphitheaters were built across the empire, from Pompeii to Carthage, from Gaul to Greece. But none compared to the heart of it all, namelijk the Colosseum in Rome, a marvel of engineering and excess. Commissioned by Emperor Vespasian and opened under his son Titus in 80 AD, the Colosseum became the eternal home of the gladiator. It could hold more than 50,000 spectators, shaded by great canopies filled with music, colored uniforms, chanting crowds, and at the center of the arena, pure sand, soaked again and again in blood. Games could last for days, even months. Mornings began with beast hunts, lions, bears, leopards brought from the far corners of the empire, pitted against men in a contest of survival. At midday came the executions, a grim interlude where criminals met violent ends for the crowd's judgment and pleasure. And then, as the sun dipped lower, the main event, the gladiators. Some were prisoners or slaves. Others, surprisingly, were volunteers, men seeking glory, fame, or redemption. Trained in special schools called ludi, they lived like soldiers and died like legends. When they stepped into the arena, it wasn't just their life on the line, it was their name, their legacy. And among the audience sat emperors. Some merely watched, others, like the infamous Commodus, chose to enter the ring themselves. Staged, of course, but dramatic nonetheless. He fancied himself a hero of Rome, slaying wild beasts and unarmed gladiators for applause. For better or worse, he turned the games into a theater of ego. To the Roman citizen, attending a gladiator fight was more than watching violence. It was a moment to witness strength, bravery, fate. The losing man, on his knees, looked not only to his opponent but to the crowd, and finally, to the emperor. A raised thumb could mean mercy, a turned one, death. That single moment, frozen in time, held the weight of an empire. The golden age of gladiators wasn't just about blood, it was about control, of life and death, of power and politics. Rome entertained itself with violence, yes, but behind every drop of blood spilled in the sand lay something deeper. A need to define itself. Strong, ruthless, eternal. And so, for centuries, the games continued. Louder, bloodier, and more grand with each passing decade. Not everyone who stepped into the sand of the arena chose it willingly. Some were dragged there in chains. Imagine, you're a captured soldier from Gaul, your homeland taken, your comrades fallen, shackled, bruised, sold like livestock in a marketplace under the scorching Italian sun. Or maybe you're a petty thief, sentenced not to death but to something worse. Damnatio ad ludum, condemnation to the games. The crowd won't know your name, but they'll cheer when you bleed. And yet, some came willingly. They signed their lives away for coin, a roof, and 2 meals a day. Veterans of war, desperate peasants, gamblers who lost everything, even men tired of living in silence. They became octorati, volunteer gladiators. To them, the arena wasn't a death sentence. It was a last chance. The sale came next. At public auctions, Lanste, the owners of gladiator schools, walked among cages of men, examining bodies like butchers inspecting meat. Broad shoulders, strong jaws, no open wounds. Price haggled like livestock. Some were bought cheap, sickly or sullen. Others fetched more than a war horse. Then came transport. Days of bouncing in wagons, guarded by hired swords, fed stale bread and warm water. And finally, the gates of the ludus. The gladiator school. Your new home. The first day was always the same. A heavy wooden door slams shut behind you. The sun above is too bright. The air smells of blood, oil, and old leather. Around you, men training with wooden swords, grunting, sweating, snarling like caged dogs. Some stare at you with quiet curiosity. Others don't even glance. They've seen too many new faces come and go. You're given no warm welcome. Just a sleeping mat, a bowl of barley stew, and a set of practice weapons. A doctor, a former fighter turned trainer, looks you up and down, says nothing, then moves on. The emotions come later. Fear. First, you realize you're not going home. Then anger. Rage even. Why you? Why like this? But for some, relief. At least you're not breaking rocks in the mines. Here you might live long enough to earn a name. Maybe even freedom. And then the strange part. You feel the sword in your hand, even a wooden one. You feel the weight of it, the balance. For a moment, you imagine yourself not as prey, but as a predator, and the transformation begins. The gates creak open. Stone walls loom, casting shadows over a dusty training ground. This is Ludus in a gladiator school. It smells of sweat, iron, and fear. Somewhere in a dark corner, a new recruit gulps nervously, while nearby a veteran sharpens his blade, eyes calm, deadly. Welcome to the second life of a gladiator. Not yet in the arena, but already fighting to survive. Most new recruits were not volunteers. They were prisoners of war, condemned criminals, runaway slaves, caught and sold like livestock. For many, it was either the ludus, the stone quarries, or a death sentence. And the ludus, brutal as it was, offered a strange kind of opportunity. Others came by choice. Men with no future, addicted to fame or driven by desperation. A few even saw the arena as a way to rise, to earn gold, glory, even freedom. The first day, dirt, bruises, and terror. Newcomers arrived in chains. Their heads were shaved, their clothes stripped, and their names erased. They were now novitius, novices. Their first steps into the courtyard were humbling. All around them, hardened fighters, half-naked bodies glistening in the sun, wooden swords slamming into sandbags, sweat flying, curses filling the air. They were given rough tunics, straw mats to sleep on, and bland meals. No armor, no blades, just training. Endless, punishing training. Some vomited from exhaustion. Some wept in silence, and some started to feel something else: a fire, a hunger to survive and prove themselves. Every day was a test. Mornings began before sunrise with drills: footwork, shield formations, dodging, balance, stamina. Then the real work began: combat training with rudis, wooden swords, wrestling, strength conditioning with sandbags, weights, and even full armor runs in scorching heat. The doctors, instructors, often retired gladiators themselves, didn't tolerate weakness. A missed block, a bruise, a second mistake, a broken nose. You learned or you were left behind. Afternoons brought rest, sometimes lectures on strategy or mythic heroes. Evenings? More sparring, punishment exercises, or mending wounds. Despite the brutality, bonds were formed. Comrades became brothers. In that courtyard of dust and blood, friendships grew stronger than steel. They trained together, bled together, mourned the dead together. There were rivalries, of course, and fights sometimes to unconsciousness. But there was also laughter, stories, and stolen songs late at night. They weren't just warriors, they were performers. Artists of death training for the stage of sand. Rising stars of the arena. Some began to stand out: tall, swift, fearless. These men earned attention. The lanista, the owner of the ludus, watched them closely. They were investments. If they survived, they could earn thousands of denarii. These elite fighters were treated differently. They were allowed better food, wine, sometimes separate quarters, personal massages, fine oils, even poetry from fans. Their names were whispered in taverns. Young women sent letters. Older women offered more. Rome had a strange taste for violence and beauty. Gladiators became the celebrities of their time. Their graffiti-covered walls. Clay lamps bore their faces. Children played as Crixus or Spiculus in the streets. The lanista, part coach, part prison warden, part businessman, protected his top fighters fiercely. He arranged fights, managed their image, and negotiated appearances like a modern-day agent. He made deals with politicians, even held private shows for Rome's elite. He was also feared. Disobedience could lead to whippings or worse, forced death matches against impossible odds. Still, if you were good, if you brought glory, the lanista might grant privileges, favors, even the chance at eventual freedom. But for all the wine and whispers, a single cut in the arena could end everything. Every training match was a reminder. Out there, death was real. Out there, the crowd decided your fate. A popular gladiator might survive a loss, spared by thumbs turned upward. A lesser one? Buried in silence. The best walked a fine line, adored, pampered, praised, yet always one mistake from the grave. Still, for some this was a calling. In the ludus they found purpose. In the fight they found clarity. And in the roar of the crowd, they felt more alive than ever. The ludus wasn't just a school, it was a forge. It burned away weakness, reshaped fear into steel, and turned forgotten men into legends. They were warriors, yes, trained to kill, shaped by pain, owned like tools. But beyond the clang of blades and the roar of the arena, they also lived. They laughed, they feared, they slept, they dreamed. And their lives were nothing short of extraordinary. Forget lavish Roman banquets and silver platters. Gladiators were more like professional athletes. Their diet was built for function, not pleasure. Their staple food? Barley porridge. Thick, filling, and simple. No spices, no sweetness. Just warm, starchy mush that filled the belly and kept them going. To this they added beans, often boiled or mashed, and sometimes lentils or peas. Meat was rare, but bones were crushed and boiled to make broth rich in calcium. Their drinks included water and occasionally a tangy vinegar mix called pasca, sour but refreshing and believed to fight fatigue. Oddly enough, Roman physicians nicknamed gladiators the barley men. Not very glamorous, I know, but this slow-digesting grain built stamina and strength for the brutal contests ahead. Their rooms were simple, but not cells. Each gladiator had a small private space more than most Roman slaves. Just a cot, maybe a straw mattress, a clay jug for water, and walls often scribbled with drawings, prayers, or names. Why the privacy? It wasn't kindness, it was investment. A well-rested gladiator fought better. Top fighters even got cleaner bedding, oil for sore muscles, and warm baths after training. By gladiator standards, this was luxury. Their training was relentless and shockingly modern. They didn't just swing swords all day, they lifted weights, heavy stones, logs, even other men. They worked with resistance bands made of animal sinew. They ran laps with full armor in scorching heat. They practiced balance on uneven ground, footwork on sand, reflex drills using small padded balls. Everything was about muscle memory and control. Some scholars call it ancient bodybuilding. Their physiques weren't just for show, and they were forged by purpose. Not lean, but dense. Heavy, durable bodies that could take a hit and keep going. And unlike soldiers, gladiators trained for duels, not war. Every move was about the show. Precision mattered. Timing, rhythm. Even how they fell had to be convincing. Out in the world, their fame bloomed like wildfire. The more popular gladiators had fan clubs, yes, even in ancient Rome. Women sent scented letters, sometimes with locks of hair. Graffiti-covered walls. Crescens, the net fighter, is the delight of all women. Some gladiators received invitations from noble women. Discreet, of course. It was risky for an elite Roman to be seen with a slave. But that didn't stop many. In the ludus, rumors swirled like smoke. Who snuck out last night? Who got that fruit basket from a senator's wife? For a man once in chains, such attention was dizzying. And yet, every gladiator knew the truth. You could be loved today and dead tomorrow. The fame, the attention, even the better food, none of it changed one fact. They were property. A popular gladiator was like a racehorse. Pampered, protected, praised, but still bought and sold. Still at the mercy of the lanista, the matchmakers, the games. Some bought their freedom with prize money. Others were gifted a wooden sword, the rudis, a symbolic release. But most, they lived on borrowed time. And yet, under the weight of it all, they walked proudly. They were gladiators, Rome's heroes, feared, adored, envied. And then, one morning, it comes, the dies pugni, the day of battle. The courtyard is quiet, no sparring, just waiting. Some men sit sharpening blades. Others sit still, eyes closed, whispering prayers to Mars or Fortuna. One kisses a small amulet. Another simply stares into the dust. The matches have been announced. Some will face wild animals. Others will duel former friends. The elite will fight in front of senators, maybe even the emperor himself. Weapons are chosen carefully. The doctors check armor, adjust straps, polish helmets. Superstitions creep in, right foot first, lucky charm under the belt, a certain way to tie the sandals. Every little ritual, a desperate grasp at fate. You can feel the tension in the air, like a storm about to break. Final moments before the arena. Then the horns sound. One by one they are called. The gate creaks open. Sunlight pours in. The sand waits. He breathes in. No turning back. He walks forward, yet not just into combat, but into legend. And now, the light is blinding. He steps out into the arena where the sand is warm beneath his feet, and the roar of the crowd is like a crashing wave. Tens of thousands of voices all aimed at him. Some cheer, some jeer. Most don't even know his name. Not yet. But they're here to see him bleed, to see someone fall, to feel alive while someone else dances with death. The Colosseum, from the inside, is overwhelming. Towering stone arches rise into the sky, marble seats filled with restless Romans, merchants, soldiers, slaves, nobles, even children. High above them all, draped in fine fabrics and shaded from the sun, sits the emperor himself. Whether he's bored or excited will matter more than any prayer. The ground beneath him is not just sand. It's soaked with the blood of years. It smells of metal, sweat, and dust. This is where heroes fall, where names are made and forgotten. Across the arena stands his opponent. Sometimes it's another fresh recruit, just as nervous. Other times it's a veteran, someone scarred, confident, someone who's lived through 20 fights and carries a reputation like armor. No words are exchanged. Just the sound of breath, of movement, of nerves tightening into muscle. Before the fight begins, there's a ritual. The two men raise their weapons to the emperor's box. Ave Caesar, morituri te salutant. Hail Caesar, those who are about to die salute you. The phrase echoes across the stones, a chilling reminder that this is not just combat, it's performance. The match may be to the death or not. It depends on the mood, the rules, the organizers, and above all, the crowd. Contrary to what films might show, not every fight ended in a fatal blow. Gladiators were expensive to train and valuable to keep alive. Sometimes a match was stopped when one man was clearly outmatched. Sometimes both survived, but always there had to be spectacle. The horn sounds. They begin. At first it's slow, a test, a circling. Every style has its rhythm. If our fighter is a Myrmido, he's heavy, with a broad shield and short sword, built for brute strength. A Retiarius dances around him, nearly unarmored, with net and trident, quick and elusive. A Thraix fights with curved blade and small shield, aiming for agility and precision. There are no random slashes. Each move is trained, rehearsed, taught in the dust and sweat of the Ludus, the training school. The crowd watches closely. They don't just want blood, they want elegance. Drama. They want to see fear, bravery, fury. They want to feel like gods watching mortals play at fate. A good hit? The crowd cheers. A wound? A louder roar? A stumble? Breathless silence. Eventually, one man is knocked down. Maybe it's our fighter, maybe not. He throws his hand into the air, a plea for mercy. The crowd decides. Sometimes they scream for blood. Sometimes they raise their thumbs for mercy. Though, to be honest, history is not so clear on that gesture. What mattered more than the angle of a thumb was the sound of the masses. And, above them all, the emperor may raise a hand, or simply nod. If mercy is granted, the flawless man lives to fight another day. If not, the death is expected to be quick, dignified, clean. But it isn't always. Sometimes it's messy, desperate, ugly. There were even assistants trained to deliver the final blow should the victor hesitate. Victory comes with its own weight. If our fighter stands victorious, he is paraded. sometimes given a crown, a prize of coins, or even the favor of the crowd. Perhaps his name will be shouted. Perhaps someone in the stands will remember his face. Perhaps he'll start to become something rare, a gladiator with fans. Back in the cells beneath the arena, if he lives, he'll be washed, fed, patched up. There may be no time to celebrate. Another fight may come soon, or a wound may fester. Nothing is guaranteed. But that first battle, that first step into the blinding sun, the first cheer, the first cut, the first blood spilled on hot sand, that never leaves you. In that moment, a gladiator is no longer a slave, no longer a criminal, no longer a number. He becomes a story. And in ancient Rome, that was the only kind of immortality that mattered. The sand is stained. The crowd has gone quiet. Another match begins somewhere else in the arena, but for our gladiator, the first battle is over. He limps through the gate he entered from, back into the dim tunnels beneath the Colosseum. There's no parade of victory waiting, no soft bed or warm meal, just the metallic sting of sweat in open cuts and the sudden silence after the storm. If he's lucky, he walks on his own. If not, others carry him. And now comes the question no one cheers for. What happens to a wounded gladiator? The ludus, the training school, had its own doctors. They weren't gentle, but they were skilled. Gladiators were investments, and valuable ones at that. To let them die from infection or blood loss was to waste months of training and piles of coin. So, yes, many were treated. Bandaged, stitched up, given vinegar to clean wounds, strange herbal concoctions for pain, and crude tools to reset bones, but still, not all made it. Some bled too much. Some never woke up. Some were patched up only to be thrown back into the sand before they had truly healed. There was no glory in dying off stage. And for those who survived and survived again and again, there was a dream. A hope whispered behind closed doors, passed like a secret between bruised lips at night. Freedom, it had a name. Rudy's. A simple wooden sword. It might look like a child's toy, but in Rome, it was one of the most powerful symbols a man could hold. When awarded, the Rudius marked a gladiator's freedom, a formal release from the arena. It meant he had earned not only survival, but respect. He had entertained the crowds, served as lanista, trainer, and proven himself time and time again. Some earned it after a set number of victories. Others were granted it as a favor, a gift from a generous sponsor or even the emperor himself. A rare few bought their own freedom with prize money won in the arena, but not everyone accepted it. And here's where the story turns. You might think every gladiator dreamed of leaving, of walking out the gates, sword in hand, free at last to start a quiet life. And some did. Some married, opened taverns, became guards, trainers, or even minor celebrities. But many stayed. They had nothing to return to. No family, no land, no real place in Roman society. They had been forged by violence, shaped by routine and discipline and blood. The sand was the only place they felt alive. The roar of the crowd, the clash of steel, it was their music, their purpose. What was a peaceful life to someone who had faced death 100 times and come out grinning? In fact, former gladiators were often invited to stay, as instructors, veterans, even champions. They became the old wolves of the ludus, training the next generation, telling stories in candlelight, limping with pride. Some went back into the arena even after being granted freedom, fighting now as octorati, volunteers. Not because they had to, but because they couldn't stay away. And how many earned their rudies? Hard to say. Records from the time are scattered, and many names lost to time, but we know that only a small fraction of gladiators ever saw that wooden sword. Most died before the chance came. Some were freed only to fall in their next bout. A few became legends, and their names echo through history. One of them was Spartacus, but his story, that's for later. For now, imagine this. A man stands at the center of the arena, bruised, scarred, victorious. The crowd chants his name. The sponsor smiles, and into his hand is placed not a sword of iron, but one of polished wood. No chains, no orders, no more battles, unless he chooses them. He lifts it high, not just a symbol of survival, but of triumph, the kind that not even time can erase. That, in ancient Rome, was the closest thing to a happy ending. And even then, not everyone wanted it. You step off the sand, your chest still heaves from the fight. Somewhere behind you, they're still shouting your name. And that name? It's not just echoing in the Colosseum. It's carved on walls, it's painted on clay cups, it's scratched onto tavern tables across the empire. You're not just a fighter, you're famous. Welcome to the other side of being a gladiator. The fame, the business, and the strange immortality that comes with it. In ancient Rome, a popular gladiator wasn't just admired, he was idolized. His image could be found on terra sigillata cups, scratched into public walls or molded into little figurines sold outside the arena. Children played with miniatures of their favorite fighters. Wealthy citizens wore amulets bearing the image of the champion they believed would bring them luck. If that sounds familiar, Moss, it should. Swap the sand for the octagon, and you're not far off from the world of modern combat sports. Today, we scream for fighters like Conor McGregor. We wear their merch, buy their branded colognes, mimic their training routines. In ancient Rome, they did the same. Only instead of Instagram stories, it was mosaic floors and perfume jars. Yes, perfume jars. Some gladiators became so iconic that perfumers would name fragrances after them. Women would wear the scent of a gladiator, hoping to capture some of his virility. Men would apply it before a night out, believing it made them bold and desirable. Gladiators were more than just fighters, they were walking brands. And like modern athletes, they had fans. Obsessive ones. There's graffiti in Pompeii that reads, "Celadus the Thracian makes the girls sigh." Celadus, a real fighter, not just a myth. Women loved him. Men wanted to be him. His fame outlived his bones. Imagine Celadus today, sponsorship deals, branded armor, maybe even his own cologne, Essentia Caladi. And the money? Oh, the money. It might surprise you, but the highest earning gladiators could rake in staggering sums. Thousands of sesterces or even denarii per fight. Some modern scholars tried to estimate that in today's terms, we're talking tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars per bout for the most popular fighters. A single win in front of the right crowd, and a gladiator might earn more than a Roman senator's annual salary. That's not far off from a UFC star's fight night purse. So, yes, fame paid. But fame also protected. A popular gladiator wasn't just a blood sport toy, he was an investment, a valuable one. Owners knew this. They treated their stars like racehorses, pampered, protected, polished. They were housed in better quarters, given better food, access to medical care, even private lovers. The best might even dine with nobility. And when they stepped into the arena, the crowd roared not for blood, but for brilliance. Let's talk showmanship. The greats knew how to entertain. They didn't just win, they made the fight a spectacle. Slow, theatrical swings, roaring after a blow, playing to the crowd with raised arms. Some gladiators even had signature moves like a wrestler's finisher. There were rules, yeah, but the real goal was entertainment. A skilled fighter could toy with a weaker opponent, dragging out the fight for drama. The crowd loved it. They didn't want blood spilled in seconds. They wanted tension, story, style. The emperor himself might be watching after all. And oh, how the emperors loved their stars. Emperor Commodus, yes, the same one from Gladiator, wasn't just a fan. He became a gladiator. He entered the arena over 700 times, but it was a show. He fought chained opponents, staged victories. Still, he modeled himself after the heroes of the sand. Some emperors sponsored gladiators, favored them with gifts, even granted them land. Being a successful gladiator could take you from slavery to stardom. But fame is a tricky thing. It gave, but it also chained. Many fighters earned their freedom and chose not to leave. Why? Because out there and beyond the arena, they were nobodies. In here, on the sand, they were gods. Some returned as trainers, others stayed active well into middle age. For them, the risk of death was a small price to pay for the roar of the crowd, the warm bath of adoration, the glittering coin purse handed out after a well-fought match. They had tasted worship, and who would trade Olympus for obscurity? So next time you hear the name of a modern fighter on the news, not think of Salatus, or Flama, or Spiculus. They fought not just for freedom, but for glory. And in some strange way, they got it. Their faces may be worn from time, their bones lost in the dust, but in the mosaics, in the carvings, in the words still scribbled on Roman walls, they're still fighting, still loved, still stars. You've heard of Spartacus, maybe of Crixus or Flama, but now imagine something different. A woman. Standing in the hot Roman sun, muscles tensed, eyes narrowed beneath a crested helmet. The crowd hushes. This isn't a sideshow. This is real. This is blood, sand, and she's ready. Yes, female gladiators did exist. They were rare, mysterious, and unforgettable. Most Romans never saw a woman fight in the arena. It wasn't a daily spectacle. But when it happened, the crowd went wild. Not always from respect, but from shock, curiosity, and sometimes desire. These women were called gladiatrices, and just like their male counterparts, they bled for the amusement of the masses. How did it begin? The earliest mentions of women fighting come from inscriptions, graffiti, and a few stunned historians. They weren't part of the original gladiator tradition. This was something new, a twist in the show. Women in the arena became popular during the late Republic and early Empire. Some emperors, and especially those with a taste for the bizarre like Nero or Domitian, loved the spectacle of women battling beasts or each other. It was rare but undeniably theatrical, and Rome adored the theatrical. Who were they? Most female gladiators were, like their male counterparts, slaves or prisoners, but some were free women, driven by the same hunger for fame, money, or rebellion. Imagine being a poor woman in a Roman slum, your days filled with labor, your nights with nothing but dust and hunger. Then someone offers you a chance to train in a ludus, to fight, to be seen, to matter. Others may have been thrill seekers, outcasts, or even noble women with dangerous curiosity. Where did they fight? Female fighters were often presented at evening games, sometimes paired in novelty matches, woman versus woman, or woman versus dwarf, or even against wild animals. They rarely fought in the grand arenas like the Colosseum, but they did appear in provincial amphitheaters, or as part of private spectacles for the elite. One of the most famous carvings we've found shows two women, Amazon and Achilles, locked in combat. According to the inscription, the fight ended in a draw, an honor few men ever earned. How did people react? Mixed feelings. Some Romans were thrilled. They found the female form in battle both titillating and terrifying. Others saw it as disgraceful, a sign of Rome's moral decay. The philosopher Juvenal mocked women who trained with wooden swords and claimed they were more gladiator than wife. But still, the crowd came, and they cheered. The gladiatrix was a walking contradiction. Desired, admired, mocked, feared. She was a woman who dared step into a man's world and sometimes beat him at it. What did they wear? No, they didn't fight naked, despite what some wild paintings suggest. Like men, they wore minimal armor, a loincloth, protective padding on one arm and one leg, and a small shield. Their helmets often had crests or masks, which added mystery into Mostloim, and maybe even protected their identity. There was something powerful about the image. A woman hidden behind iron, sword in hand, walking calmly toward blood and fate. Did they win freedom? In rare cases, yes. Like male gladiators, female fighters could earn their freedom by surviving enough matches, pleasing the crowd, or impressing a wealthy patron. A freed gladiatrix might receive a wooden sword, the rudis, and walk away, bruised but victorious. But just like their male counterparts, some didn't want to leave. The rush, the fame, the roar of the crowd. For a woman used to being invisible in society, it was intoxicating. Why did it end? Eventually, Rome changed. By the 2nd century AD, under Emperor Septimius Severus, female gladiators were banned entirely. The empire was becoming more conservative. The games, once wild and unpredictable, were tightening into tradition. But the memory lingered. In ancient graffiti, in carvings, in half-erased names like Amazon and Achilles, the echoes of those women remained, silent but unforgotten. What were they really? Were they warriors, performers, victims, heroes? The answer is yes, all of it. The gladiatrix defied her time. She bled in the dust, same as any man. She faced the crowd, the sword, the scream, and sometimes she won. And maybe somewhere in the hush of history we still hear her footsteps echo across the sand. Spartacus, from Thracian warrior to gladiator slave. He wasn't born in the sand of the arena. He didn't grow up hearing the roar of the crowd. Long before he became a symbol of rebellion, Spartacus was a man, a husband, a soldier, and eventually, a prisoner. This is where his story truly begins. Spartacus was born in Thrace, a wild, mountainous region northeast of Greece, far from the heart of Rome. His people were fierce, independent, and known for their skill in war. Thracians didn't bow easily. He likely served as a soldier either in his own tribe's armies, or possibly even as an auxiliary in the Roman military at some point. A common fate for conquered peoples. But at some point, things changed. Some say he deserted, others say he rebelled. Either way, Rome saw him as a threat. He was captured, stripped of his status, enslaved, and then his true battle began. Imagine that moment. One day you're a warrior, proud, free, with family, land, maybe even a name sung among your people. The next, you're shackled, dragged across foreign roads, spoken to like cattle. Some stories say Spartacus had a wife, a Thracian woman taken with him, a priestess of Dionysus perhaps. Her fate? Unknown. Maybe she was sold off. Maybe she died in transit. Maybe she watched him disappear one last time before Rome swallowed him whole. Loss, rage, silence. These are the seeds of rebellion. But not yet. Not yet. Rome didn't send Spartacus to the fields. He wasn't put in chains to build roads or haul stone in the quarries. No, someone saw something in him, a spark, a physique, a fighter's soul. And so he was sold to Lentulus Batiatus, the owner of a ludus, a gladiator school in Capua, just south of Rome. Batiatus was no fool. He ran his school like a business. He wanted winners. He wanted shows. And in Spartacus, he saw potential. Arrival in the ludus, picture it. A dusty courtyard. Men training with wooden swords. The clash of shields. Barked commands in Latin. The scent of sweat and oil and blood. And into this world walks Spartacus, not yet famous, not yet feared. Just another slave, muscles coiled, jaw clenched, eyes watching everything. He wasn't alone. Alongside him were other men destined for the arena. Crixus, a proud Gaul, Onomaus, fierce and silent, dozens more, each with their own past, each now reduced to a weapon. Days turned into weeks, grueling drills, blows that bruised not just flesh but dignity. The doctor is, gladiator trainers were relentless. They taught technique, obedience, spectacle. But Spartacus wasn't just learning to fight, he was watching, listening, feeling the cracks in the walls of this machine Rome had built. And perhaps even then he began to dream. In the arena, a gladiator earned a new identity. Sometimes a nickname, sometimes a legend. Spartacus might have been a chosen name, a way to keep his Thracian roots alive under Roman chains. Or perhaps it was the name the Romans gave him, not knowing they were branding a future symbol of rebellion. Either way, the man was changing. He was becoming more than a slave. We don't know the exact moment Spartacus first stepped into the arena, but we know he fought. He lived. He won. The crowd learned his name. Batiatus saw profit. But in Spartacus, something deeper stirred. Not bloodlust, not glory, purpose. He had tasted the belly of Rome, its cruelty, its machinery, and maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to plan. The calm before the storm. Capua slept, the ludus was locked, and in the cells quiet whispers passed between bruised lips. They spoke of escape, of weapons, of freedom, but that is a story for another chapter. Before Spartacus led an army, before he shook the empire, he stood here, in the sand, under the sun, a man reborn through pain. And now, the storm was coming. The air in Capua was thick that night, still, expectant. Inside the ludus, the men waited, not as slaves, not as gladiators, but as sparks ready to catch flame. It began not with a roar, but with a whisper. Then, a kitchen knife. The escape from Capua. The plan was desperate, wild. They were only 70 at first. A handful of gladiators and slaves armed with whatever they could find. Cleavers, spit rods, broken furniture. But Spartacus knew something about pressure. He'd trained in it, fought in it, lived in it, and now he turned it on Rome. They struck with fury, cutting down guards, breaking locks, seizing weapons. They looted the kitchens, the armory, and when the doors flew open, the ludus became a war camp. Batiatus was dead. His empire of pain shattered. Spartacus didn't run. He led. From gladiators to rebels. With nothing but stolen blades and raw conviction, the escaped slaves fled to Mount Vesuvius, hiding in the hills like wolves, hungry, hunted, defiant. The Roman authorities laughed at first. A band of slaves? Escaped gladiators? No match for trained legions. They sent small patrols, and Spartacus crushed them. Each skirmish brought weapons, horses, armor. Word spread like wildfire. Slaves in the fields heard the stories, in mines, kitchens, and quarries hope stirred. And then they ran. From all over Italy they ran. Thousands of men and women abandoned their chains and headed for the mountains. They didn't care if Spartacus had no banners, no coins, no royal name. He had something better: courage, vision, a cause. Brothers in arms. Spartacus didn't stand alone. Beside him were warriors shaped by the same sand. Crixus, the proud Gaul with fire in his heart. Onomas, silent but unbreakable. Gannicus, wild and laughing with a sword in each hand. They had trained together, bled together, and now they would lead together, and not as champions of the arena, but as generals of a rising army. Spartacus didn't command them, he earned them. They weren't just fighting for freedom. They were fighting for revenge, for dignity, for a world beyond chains. Rome trembles. At first, the Senate treated it like a brush fire, containable, annoying. But then towns began to fall. Guard posts were overwhelmed. Convoys disappeared, villas burned. Fields once tilled by slaves now stood abandoned. And from Vesuvius, the black smoke wasn't just ash. It was a signal. The rebellion had become a movement. Rome was rattled. They sent legions, commanders with polished armor and borrowed pride. And time after time, Spartacus outmaneuvered them, not with numbers, but with cunning. Surprise raids, hidden paths, coordinated attacks that no mere slave should have been capable of. But Spartacus wasn't mere. A banner of fire. What drove the people to him? It wasn't just the promise of freedom. It was the sight of a man who had stood in the blood of the arena, who had survived every death Rome threw at him, and then turned that blood into a banner. His army had no official flag, but they didn't need one. The name Spartacus was the banner. To whisper it was to imagine a life beyond bondage. To shout it was to defy Rome itself. And so they came, tens of thousands strong. Runaway slaves, farmers, shepherds, even free men tired of corruption and war. The rebellion was no longer a spark, it was an inferno. Power reversed. Imagine it, a Roman villa surrounded by armed former slaves. A senator hiding beneath silks, trembling as the people he once beat now stand over him. Not for gold, not for cruelty, but for justice. The world had turned upside down, and Spartacus was at its center. The road ahead. But even as cities fell and victories piled, Spartacus knew something deep in his bones. This could not last forever. Rome was vast. It would come back stronger, more ruthless, more desperate. So he began to plan again, not just for more battles, but for an escape. North, over the Alps, back to Thrace, back to freedom. At least that was the dream. But fate and loyalty had other ideas. For now the hills echoed with triumph. Rome bled. The people chanted one name, Spartacus. The Alps, cold, silent, waiting. On the other side, Thrace, home, a life without chains, without war. He had done it. He had beaten Rome in the ring, and now in the field. But what happens when victory divides the very people who fought for it? The plan to escape Spartacus was no fool. He knew Rome would not forgive this rebellion. What began as a fire was now a storm, and Rome would bring the full force of its empire to crush it. So he made a decision. They had to leave, cross the Alps, disappear, scatter, live. He gathered his generals, Crixus, Gannicus, Castus, and others. The map was clear. Northward, through the mountains, away from Roman reach. But not everyone agreed. Some had no homeland to return to. Some had never tasted power before, and now they wore it like armor. And some, like Crixus, were not ready to run. The first divide Crixus wanted to march toward Rome, not away. He believed this was not the end, but the beginning. That the gods had given them victory for a reason. that with enough fighters they could take the capital itself. Spartacus listened in silence. This man was his brother, not by blood but by bond. They had stood together in chains, in sand, in triumph. And now they stood apart. So they split. Crixus took around 30,000 men, mostly Gauls and Germans, and marched south. Spartacus, heart-heavy, turned north. Rome strikes back. It didn't take long. Rome, humiliated by defeat after defeat, had grown furious. They sent Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, and gave him an army not of pride, but of fear and punishment. He chased Crixus first. The two forces met near Mount Garganus. Outnumbered, outmaneuvered, Crixus fell, along with tens of thousands of his men. When Spartacus heard the news, he mourned, and then he raged, blood for blood. He turned south again, not to run, not yet. To honor Crixus, Spartacus captured 300 Roman prisoners, and in a grim, symbolic echo, forced them to fight each other in mock gladiator games. Rome had taught him blood sport. Now he returned the lesson. But Spartacus wasn't driven by cruelty. He was driven by loss and by time running out. The dream dims. He tried again to move north, but Crassus had learned. He fortified the passes, built trenches, cut off supplies. He even constructed a massive ditch and wall to trap Spartacus's army in the toe of Italy. The Alps faded behind them like a dream they were never meant to touch. And still, the army grew. Tens of thousands, some say over 100,000, now followed Spartacus. But it was no longer the same army. Too large. Too disorganized. Some wanted freedom. Others wanted loot. Many didn't understand why they were marching anymore. Spartacus carried the cause alone. One last chance. He tried to negotiate, to buy ships and escape to Sicily, to find another way out. The deal fell through. Betrayals, delays, miscommunication. The sea was closed, and now the trap was tightening. Crassus was coming from the north. Pompey, another general, from the south. Rome was no longer careless. It was determined. The final march, Spartacus looked at his army as tired, angry, proud, and saw what he had created. Not a rebellion, not an escape, but a revolution. And revolutions do not end quietly. He gathered his weapons, his closest comrades, his war-scarred soul, and he turned one last time to face the might of Rome. He had no throne, no crown, no flag, only fire. The fields were quiet. Somewhere ahead the Roman legions waited. Tens of thousands of armored soldiers, disciplined, ruthless, silent as stone. Behind Spartacus, what remained of his army stood ready, tired, hungry, wounded, but still standing. They were not soldiers. They were runaways, bakers, miners, shepherds, slaves, and yet for 2 long years they had done the impossible, and now it would end. The last council. There was no tent, no table, just dirt and stars. Spartacus gathered his closest men, Gannicus, Castus, Nasir, others who had fought by his side since the arena. He looked at their faces, weathered, proud, marked by years of battle and loss. "This is where it ends," he said, "but we do not end as slaves." There was no speech, no glory, just a shared understanding. They were not fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting for meaning. Morning breaks. The sun rose over the final battlefield near the river Ciliarus. Crassus's legions stretched across the hills, a wall of shields and steel. Spartacus stood at the front of his army. No armor of gold, no flowing cape, just a simple tunic, a sword, and the fire of defiance in his chest. He turned to his men, thousands behind him, and raised his blade. No words, just motion. And then they charged. The final clash. It was chaos, Steel against steel. Screams. Blood in the air. Spartacus moved like a storm, cutting through Roman lines, breaking ranks, looking always for one man. Crassus. He wanted to end it himself, to look into the eyes of the empire and strike. But fate had other plans. A spear caught his thigh, then a slash to the ribs, then another. He fell to his knees, but he did not stop. He rose again, swinging, roaring, until he was surrounded. They say he killed 2 centurions even while dying, but no one saw him fall. His body was never found. Only silence. After the fire Rome won, the rebellion was crushed. 6,000 survivors were captured and crucified along the Appian Way, a road of death stretching from Capua to Rome. A warning, a punishment, a message. But the fire Spartacus lit was never truly extinguished, a name that endured. He left behind no writings, no tomb, no statue in his honor, and yet, centuries later, his name still burns. He was not a king, not a noble, he held no titles, but he inspired the enslaved to believe in something more. He showed that even the lowest born could stand against empire. And in the silence after battle, in the dust and blood, that truth remained. Spartacus died a slave, but his spirit marched on. The cheers faded slowly, not in one day, not with one law, but like a dying flame, the world of the gladiator began to dim. Rome itself was changing. The empire, once bold and unstoppable, had begun to crack. Barbarian invasions, economic strain, political chaos, and in the heart of this transformation, a quiet new voice was rising, a voice that preached peace, forgiveness, the sacredness of life, Christianity, the shift in soul. For centuries, blood had soaked the sand in honor of the gods. Gladiatorial combat was more than a spectacle. It was ritual, pride, Roman identity. But now, new beliefs challenged old power. Early Christian thinkers spoke against the games. They saw no glory in slaughter, no honor in killing for entertainment. One bishop, a man named Telemachus, stepped into the arena itself, trying to stop a fight. The crowd, furious at his interference, stoned him to death. But the message had already struck deep. The games were beginning to feel wrong. The final games. By the early 5th century, the great arenas no longer roared like they once had. Emperors changed, laws shifted, and eventually the order came down. No more gladiatorial combat. The final sanctioned fights are believed to have taken place in the early 400s. Not in grandeur, but in silence, watched by fewer and fewer. The Colosseum itself began to decay. Fires, earthquakes, stones stolen to build churches and homes. And where once tens of thousands had screamed for blood, there was only wind. The arena forgotten nature crept in. Grass grew through the cracks. Ravens perched on broken columns. Children played where men once died. Rome forgot. For centuries, the Colosseum was little more than a ruin, a silent skeleton of an age long past. Few remembered the names of the champions who had once walked its sands. The glory had faded. The empire had fallen. The gladiator was no more. But not gone. And yet, there is something strange about memory. Even as time swept the arenas away, stories remained. Whispers passed from mouth to mouth of brave men, of roaring crowds, of blood and honor and fate decided by a single gesture of a thumb. The era ended, but the myth had just begun. The sands may have settled, but the gladiator refused to vanish. Even as centuries passed, his shadow lived on, in poems, in paintings, in whispered tales. No longer a man of muscle and sweat, he became a symbol a ghost in bronze and marble, a legend too vivid to forget. The myth awakens. In the Renaissance, artists rediscovered Rome. They dug through ruins, unearthed mosaics, studied worn frescoes. They found names carved in stone, names of fighters long dead. And in these ancient champions, they saw beauty, tragedy, power. The gladiator returned, not in flesh, but in imagination. Painters and sculptors shaped him into something almost divine, noble, heroic, a warrior poet facing death with honor. He was no longer just a slave forced to kill, he was an idea. Courage, defiance, strength in chains. Books, stages, and silver screens writers too were drawn to him. In the 18th and 19th centuries, novels began to explore gladiators as tragic heroes. Noble men caught in a cruel world. Their stories, part history, part fantasy, inspired theater productions and early films. Then, in 2000, came Ridley Scott's Gladiator. The world watched as Russell Crowe's Maximus walked into the Colosseum once more. With dust on his boots and fury in his eyes, he brought the arena back to life. Of course, not everything was accurate, but that wasn't the point. The film captured something deeper, the raw emotional weight of the gladiator's journey, from slave to champion to martyr. Pop stars of pain. In a way, ancient gladiators were the first celebrities. They had fans, nicknames, merchandise. Yes, even in Rome, they sold small clay figures of famous fighters. Children played with miniature murmillos. Women wore pendants shaped like their favorite retiarii. There are records of graffiti found on Roman walls. Crude sketches of fighters, hearts drawn beside their names. Some wealthy women were said to bribe guards just to spend a night with the arena's brightest stars. They were quite literally the rock stars of blood. Fighters then and now. You could say not much has changed. Today we cheer for champions in cages and rings. UFC boxing, MMA, big names, bigger paydays. And yes, comparisons have been made. There are records suggesting that a top-tier gladiator like the famous Flamma could earn massive sums in denarii. If we translate that into modern currency, the numbers are jaw-dropping. Thousands of denarii per fight. Enough to buy land, homes, freedom. Not so different from today's stars like Conor McGregor, who earn millions per bout, endorse brands, wear designer clothes, and whose faces appear on billboards across the world. Gladiators had no Instagram, but they had walls, pottery, murals, and just like today, the people watched, followed, adored. The flame still burns. Even now, the image of the gladiator stirs something in us. Maybe it's the strength. Maybe it's the rebellion. Maybe it's the dream of rising above chains, of being remembered, of leaving a name carved in stone. The truth is, we want to believe that in a brutal world, honor can still shine. That a man, even broken and enslaved, can fight for something greater than himself. That in the end, he can become more than just a fighter. He can become a legend. The arena is silent now. No roar, no drums, no clash of steel. Just wind whispering through broken arches. Just shadows stretching across the stone. Once it was a place of thunder, of fury and fire. Now, only dust remains. But listen closely, and you can still hear them. Footsteps in the sand, a breath before the strike, a final cheer before the end. They are not gone. Not truly. The passing of an era. The last games were held in the 5th century. By then, the world had changed. Rome was crumbling. Christianity was rising. And with it, a new morality, one that found no glory in blood sport. Emperors declared the games too brutal, too pagan, too outdated. One by one, the arenas closed. The training schools emptied. The swords were sheathed for good. The Colosseum, once the heart of the empire, became a ruin, a monument not to violence but to memory. Stone and silence where once there was life and death, buried but not forgotten. Gladiators disappeared from history's stage. No more chants, no more sand beneath their feet, no more fights to the death, but something remained. The idea of the gladiator, like a strong, tragic, defiant, endured. Artists painted them. Writers imagined them. Filmmakers resurrected them. They became symbols, icons, myths wrapped in muscle and sorrow. Their struggles, though ancient, still speak to something deeply human. The fight to be free, the will to be seen, the desire to leave a mark on the world, even if it's written in blood. A final thought before sleep. Not all gladiators were heroes. Not all battles were noble, but they were human. They feared. They hoped. They loved. They stood beneath the gaze of thousands, hearts pounding, knowing they might not live to see the moon. Yet they fought anyway, for freedom, for fame, for tomorrow. And so we end this story. Not with the clash of swords, but with the hush that follows. You've walked beside them, through the sand, the pain, the roar, the glory. Now let them rest. Let the arena grow still again. Let the stories fade into dreams. And as you close your eyes, perhaps you'll carry with you a piece of that ancient world. Not its cruelty, but its courage. Because though the gladiators are gone, their echoes remain. Sleep well, traveler of time. The sand is still, the night is kind, and the legends keep watch.